Good morning and welcome everyone. I'd like to start by making sure we first give another great round of applause to the Tiger Squadron for that terrific flyover. For those I've not had the chance to meet, my name is John Heibush, and I'm the Executive Director of the Ronald Reagan Presidential Foundation and Institute. Thank you so much for joining us on this slightly windy day as we celebrate what would have been Ronald Reagan's 111th birthday, and as I've said before, as President Reagan would have quipped, the 72nd anniversary of his 39th birthday. Today is an especially wonderful day because last year on President Reagan's 110th birthday, we were still under some very strict COVID lockdown guidelines and had to celebrate the moment without an audience present. It is terrific to have all of you here with us today to properly honor our 40th president on this extraordinary day. This is also the last birthday celebration for President Reagan that I will preside over, given I'll be moving on next month. But I have to say it has been a distinct honor to share this day with many of you these past 12 years, commemorating President Reagan's life and legacy each year, alongside those who wear the uniform of the United States Marine Corps, has been one of the highlights of my career. President Reagan once said something that's fitting for birthdays. He said, quote, "There is no purpose more noble than for us to sustain and celebrate life. We have no higher duty, no greater cause as humans. Life and the preservation of freedom to live it in dignity is what we are here on earth to do." So let's get on with celebrating his life. Before we begin our formal program, I'd like to recognize a few of our special guests with us today. And I love introducing this couple because they meant so much to Simi Valley in this area. Former Congressman Elton Gallegly and his wife Janice. Elton, Janice. And absolutely wonderful to have them here. Michael Reagan and his entire family, representing 3 generations, I think. Michael. And of course, a special thank you again to all of the men and women here today from the United States Marine Corps at Camp Pendleton. We are honored to have the support of our fighting men and women from such a vital military installation. On behalf of everyone here, and I'm sure all Americans, thank you for your service. And now on to today's program in honor of the 111th birthday of Ronald Wilson Reagan. Ladies and gentlemen, please rise for the March on the Colors, the playing of our national anthem, and the invocation by Captain Wayne McCrae, our chaplain here on behalf of the United States Navy.
Would you please bow your heads with me? Lord God Almighty, it is with fond memories of years long past that we gather together to honor the birthday and legacy of President Ronald Reagan. His love for you was evident in his many speeches and writings, and similarly, this love led him to a deep love and longing for the nation that you chose him to lead. As a parent cares for their children, so President Reagan cared for us. He understood people and communicated to our deeper longings. He saw that part of us that you, Lord God, had made for deeper relationships. As President Reagan once said, there is a hunger in this country today, a hunger for spiritual guidance. People yearn once again to be proud of their country and proud of themselves, and to have confidence in themselves. Rightfully so, Lord God. He phrased this as a hunger for spiritual guidance. That is part of how you have made us. Not only do we need for connection with each other, but as President Reagan understood, we need connection with you. We thank you for the memory and legacy of your servant, President Ronald Reagan. And we thank you and ask you for your blessing upon our remembrance and upon our nation. Amen.
Please be seated. Ladies and gentlemen, the Commanding General of Marine Corps Base Camp Pendleton, Brigadier General Jason Woodworth.
Thank you, Mr. Highbush. Just want to recognize very quickly Ms. Peggy Noonan. Ma'am, thank you for being here today. Mr. Reagan and family, thank you for spending your day with us this morning. It's truly a privilege to be here with you today as we recognize the 111th birthday of our 40th president, the Honorable Ronald Reagan. On behalf of all the Marines and sailors on the West Coast, thank you for inviting us to participate. Today, representing your Marine Corps and Navy team, we have the 1st Marine Division Band, who sound absolutely incredible today. Thank you, Staff Sergeant. And under one of the hardest conditions I've seen for a color guard, the Marine Corps Air Station Camp Pendleton Color Guard. Hoorah, well done, Marines. When they say wave, they meant wave on the flag today. And headquarters and support battalions with us to assist in honoring the President. In 1986, President Reagan said during a speech at Marine Corps Air Station Cherry Point, "The world looks to America for leadership, and America looks to its armed forces, to their Corps of Marines." As you can see before you today, some things never change. Thank you to all the Marines and sailors who are here in attendance. The Marines value one thing the most: its leadership, particularly during times of crisis. President Reagan began his first term with international crisis and adversity. As Commander-in-Chief, he knew exactly how and when to use the nation's armed forces as part of his vision to enhance American strength and reassure allies through the use of both hard and soft power. During Operation Urgent Fury in Grenada, Marines were given the dual role of not only securing an airport by force, but also rescuing American university students during the conflict. Multiple missions simultaneously. The message: we will use force when necessary, but we will never leave an American, our brothers or sisters, behind. Reagan mourned with the nation when Marines died in the bombing of Beirut while securing peace in the region plagued with terrorism and despotism. When Reagan needed to defend democracy in Honduras against Cuban and Soviet incursion, once again he called on the Marines. His vision was his foundation. He stuck to it. His ability to communicate, much due to wonderful people like Ms. Noonan, this vision and his ability to lead a nation during times of crisis are what led to the success of the Reagan era. and of course, the influence of the magnificent Nancy Reagan, his incredible wife. When President Reagan left office, the U.S. was postured for the Cold War's end. We had projected power worldwide through a robust military and strong diplomatic policy. His leadership exemplified honorable integrity, moral courage, and commitment to a vision of the United States. And these are qualities any person who hopes to lead would do well to emulate, and we try to instill in the ranks of all of our armed services. Today, Camp Pendleton is a pristine example of what President Reagan loved so much about Southern California. It serves as the West Coast's premier Fleet Marine Force training base. Marines continue to demonstrate qualities of strong, robust national defense that Reagan worked so hard to maintain during his presidency. And today, more than ever, cultural, regional, and generational gaps continue to drive narratives. Modern technology allows these narratives to grow roots, and for some, that might signal an uncertain future. And perhaps our parents or grandparents felt uncertain about our generation and how we would shape the future. But when I go to work each day and see these Marines and sailors aboard Camp Pendleton train together and stand and prepare for a battle, I know that our values of honor, courage, and commitment have not diminished. President Reagan understood that. He spent his time in office knowing that the traditions and values of America would endure. And as he said, and is as engraved on his gravestone over here to my right, what is right will always eventually triumph. Throughout his life, President Reagan worked to ensure the future of America for generations to come. Though imperfect, America remains a beacon on the hill for others around the world, for the oppressed and disadvantaged. Looking at the men and women here today, at the service members who wear the cloth of our nation, and particularly all of you supporting and honoring Ronald Reagan, I think this legacy is secured. On behalf of the Marines and Sailors of Installations West, I extend a very sincere thank you to the the Ronald Reagan Presidential Library for allowing us to join you here today, sir. Happy birthday, Mr. President, and thank you all.
Thank you so much, General. Here at the Reagan Library, we are dedicated to the preservation and promotion of Ronald Reagan's legacy. He was known for many things, among them fighting for freedom and democracy, restoring national pride, shrinking our tax burden and the role of government in our lives, and peace through strength when it comes to our national defense. Through it all, they called him the Great Communicator. He remarked on this in his farewell address to the nation in January of 1989. He said, and I quote, "I won a nickname, the Great Communicator, but I never thought it was my style or the words I used that made a difference. It was the content. I wasn't a great communicator, but I communicated great things. They didn't spring full bloom from my brow. They came from the heart of a great nation, from our experience, our wisdom, and our belief in the principles that have guided us for 2 centuries. Helping President Reagan communicate such great things were a handful of standout speechwriters on his staff who were able to take his thoughts and ideas and work with him to put such prose on paper. One such remarkably talented speechwriter who wrote for President Reagan during the heart of his presidency was Peggy Noonan. As his speechwriter and assistant to the president, Peggy crafted for Ronald Reagan some of the most memorable addresses of his presidency. His unforgettable speech before the boys of Pont-du-Hoc at Normandy in 1984 to mark the 40th anniversary of D-Day. His soothing and soaring words that moved a nation forward following the Space Shuttle Challenger disaster in 1986. Through these speeches and more, Peggy displayed a mastery of her craft. It would come as no surprise, a surprise to no one, that in her years following the Reagan presidency as a columnist for the Wall Street Journal, she won the Pulitzer Prize for commentary. It has been a real privilege to serve at the Reagan Foundation these past 12 years, one that has led to so many incredible opportunities and unforgettable moments. Without a doubt, one of those has been to get to know and work alongside Peggy in her role as a trustee for the Ronald Reagan Presidential Foundation and Institute. Her guidance and wisdom as a board member has ensured the preservation of President Reagan's legacy in a meaningful and thought-provoking way and been a major factor in the foundation's growth and success. Among her many contributions, Peggy was instrumental in the creation of the Reagan Institute in Washington, D.C., and our popular Time for Choosing speaker series, at which she'll be speaking on the future of the Republican Party tomorrow night. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming the remarkable Peggy Noonan.
Thank you, my dear John. Thank you. Welcome, welcome, welcome to all of you up front, to those in the back. I thank you all. It is very good to be here on this beautiful morning in Simi Valley, California, to celebrate a great man who was also a good man, which is something that happens now and then in history, but not every day. I feel I should note that Simi, as in Simi Valley, the word Simi, I am told, is an indigenous American word. Simi means windy. I just found that out. I believe today it's very true. Look, it's wonderful to be here. The Reagans loved this place. Nancy Reagan loved this place. She loved to be with the staff and management and docents. She loved to have parties upstairs and meet new friends and urge support for the library. I don't think she ever missed a party or a gathering. She really, I think after Ronnie died, it became another home for her and a great investment for her and a great love for her. And this is where I also got to know her very well, here and in her home, and where we had some wonderful talks about what it is like to have been so deeply enmeshed in high history in America. She was a most remarkable woman. I thank you, General Woodworth, Captain McRae. It's always good to have the Marines and the Navy in the house. Thank you so much. Thank you, my friends. I find myself, when I think about President Reagan these days, going over certain surprising areas. He was a very great political leader, of course. He was the leader in an age of great leaders. Margaret Thatcher, the Pope, John Paul II, who was also such a great political presence, apart from his spiritual importance. But I find myself thinking of some of Ronald Reagan's personal qualities too. And I'm going to speak of just a few of them. But before I do, I want to quickly mention another great gent. Most of you know or know of John Highbush, the head of the Reagan Foundation. Nancy Reagan personally chose him for that job, and Nancy Reagan was a pretty good judge of men. I have worked with John as a board member, as he said, I think for about 12 or 13 years. He has been my friend, my colleague, my partner in crime. His talents and gifts are so broad that for fun at night, he writes best-selling novels. He is a man of vision and guts, and in his time here, he has achieved the spectacular, the endowment that lets this foundation exist and thrive. John. The Reagan GE scholarships. John. The educating new generations of scholars, John. The making us the most respected presidential library in America, the one that reinvented what a presidential library is, John. The Reagan Institute, which carries forward the meaning of Reaganism. John made that happen. How does a great and sprawling institution get through a historic pandemic intact? John. You see those hills and mountains behind me? John put them there. But I must say, really, John as a leader and manager, John just doesn't help the idea and refine it. John executes, he makes it happen. And I have simply watched his work with awe. For some reason, I believe he also has a right to a private life and more bestsellers. And so he's decided that after more than a dozen years here, he will be stepping down. And as you do, my friend, I say, look around this place, John. Look on your mighty works and rejoice. Look at him being so modest. He actually is modest. So, President Reagan. I've been lately thinking of a small mystery. Here's the mystery. It is that politics and political talk dominates our time, and yet most of the political figures talking on our screens, talking endlessly on our screens, do so without deploying a great tool and weapon of politics, and that is humor. Ronald Reagan used humor and wit to make his points and to move things forward every day. This, of course, was simply natural to him. I think it's a gift God gave him. It was his nature. I have said in writing about him that humor is imagination operating on good nature. And I think that's what Reagan's humor was. He used it to respond to critics. He would flip a criticism to take the power out of it. You all remember, some of us worked with him. He was often accused of being lazy. He did not respond, as you might think, saying, now I disagree with that. If you saw my schedule, I work very hard. He didn't say that. He didn't defend himself. He said instead, I know hard work never killed a man, but I figure why take a chance? When they said he was stupid, he said, I know, I was thinking about that the other day while I was reading the funny papers. He deployed wit very effectively in personal negotiations. Once, there was a big vote on a tough bill, and President Reagan called into the Oval Office a U.S. Senator, a Republican, who was bucking the White House and not voting for the bill because it was a tough one. So the senator walked into the Oval Office for the first time, and he was awed to be with Reagan, but he said, you know, he couldn't afford to back him. He didn't want Reagan to think he was disloyal. The senator whispered, Mr. President, I love you. Why, if you told me to jump out of a plane, I'd jump, but, and Reagan said, jump. And the senator voted for that bill, and the bill passed. So I just think we could use a little more humor and wit in our politics now. It's something that works. It lightens the intellectual load. It sweetens the air. So political figures, think about that. I think of another aspect of Ronald Reagan's personal style. Ronald Reagan lived a bustling life full of movement and action and issues and people. And he was a political figure. He mixed with people. He tried to win them over. I beg your pardon. But I think he was by nature a more solitary person than we remember. A man who really liked and was happiest in solitary pursuits. It was a sacrifice for him to be as public a person as he had to be in order to do politics in America. He was a solitary nature. He loved solitary pursuits, writing letters, reading, on the horse at the ranch, riding with Nancy. I believe he believed in privacy in a sort of old-fashioned American way. He believed in a line, an invisible line between you and the world, but it was a real line. He would never, as politicians do, wade into a diner in New Hampshire during the primaries and interrupt a booth full of people having lunch to introduce himself and tell them he was running. He would never do that. He didn't want to interrupt people while they were dining. He wasn't shy. He was friendly, but he wasn't quite gregarious, and he wasn't quite voluble. He just had a sense of his space and your space, and they weren't the same space. That is very American. That is very pre-social media. Connected to that, I mean that seriously, connected to that, perhaps, was the fact that though he was a political person who made history in the political sphere, I really, and I've thought about this for years, I do not think his conception of himself was that of a politician. I think he saw himself, experienced himself as an artist. As a student in college, he sketched and drew and wrote short stories and little plays. He thought he might become a cartoonist. As a young man, he went into broadcasting before it was a formalized news bringer. He was in broadcasting when it was more about entertainment in its earliest days. Then he went on to Hollywood, where he acted and worked with artists, screenwriters, set designers, directors. In middle age, he went into politics, but I think he still felt he was an artist, and that was a good thing to be in politics, because an artist isn't an economist. An artist doesn't look at rows of numbers. An artist tries to see the big picture, the big meaning of things, to capture the essence of a thing, to name it and then address it. If you think about his work, even just with the Soviet Unions, naming what they were, painting what they were, saying that what they were would fall, that was an artist at work, not an economist. I think we could use more artists in our politics, especially now. More big picture, more knowing the size of things and what should be said about them. And I find myself finishing up here thinking, as interestingly enough John did, about Ronald Reagan's farewell address. I hadn't gone back to it in a while. I looked at it in the past few days. I had worked with him on it. We met a number of times in the Oval Office. It was important to him in a way as a document, as an endpoint document. But it was not at all important as a message of politics or partisanship, or after a famously triumphant presidency, a spiking the ball. None of that interested him. He felt he'd done what he'd done. He felt he'd done what he went into the White House to do, and he got most of it done. And he felt secure about his efforts, but he didn't dwell on his place in history. He never said the word legacy. It was of no interest to him. He lacked a kind of historical self-consciousness or vanity or hunger to burnish his image. I did not know then when I worked with him, but I know it now. That is so unusual in politics. But the farewell. It was the last time he spoke to us as President of the United States. It was 9:02 p.m., January 11, 1989. He said it had been the honor of his life to be president. He said, one of the things about the presidency is you're always somewhat apart. You spend a lot of time going by too fast in a car someone else is driving and seeing the people through tinted glass, the parents holding up a child and the person by herself waving, or the person you saw too late and couldn't wave back to. And he always wished he could stop and reach out, have a little conversation. He had loved living in the White House. From the residence upstairs, he could look out the window in the mornings, and when there was no humidity or fog, he could see across the Potomac to the Virginia shore. And someone told him that's the view Lincoln had when he saw the smoke rising from Bull Run. And Reagan was glad that he could see more prosaic things, the morning traffic or a sailboat on the river or somebody jogging on a trail. In thinking about the past 8 years, the image that had come to his mind was a nautical one. He said it was back in the early 1980s, at the height of the boat people fleeing Vietnam, an American sailor on the USS Midway, which had been patrolling the South China Sea. The sailor saw on the horizon a leaky little boat. Crammed inside were refugees hoping to get to America. The Midway sent a launch to bring them safely to the big ship. As the refugees made their way through the sea, one saw the sailor on the deck. And that guy stood up and he called out to the sailor and he said, "Hello, American sailor. Hello, freedom man." That sailor wrote to the president after that happened, and he told him about it, and Reagan couldn't get it out of his mind. Reagan said, that's what it was to be an American in the 1980s. We stood again for freedom. I know we always have, but somehow in the past few years, the world again, and in a new way, we ourselves rediscovered it. He said, as John noted, the pundits called him the Great Communicator, but he had never thought of himself that way. He only thought that he was communicating great things that came from American history, an American tradition, great facts of this country. He said ours was the first revolution in the history of man that truly reversed the course of government, and with 3 little words, we the people. We the people tell the government what to do, it doesn't tell us. We the people are the driver, the government is the car. We decide where it's going to go, by what route, and how fast. And at the end he said, there's a great tradition of presidential warnings in presidential farewells, and he had one that was on his mind. It was about the fact that American self-respect would not mean much and would not last unless it was grounded in serious knowledge of the history of your country, how it came about, what it means, why it should be existing in the future. He asked if we were doing enough in our country, in our schools, and at home, to tell our kids all about our history. He said, if we don't, our history will be removed. It will become a lesser thing. And if it becomes a lesser thing, we will become a lesser people. He said younger parents seem not so sure that they can teach their kids an unambivalent appreciation of America, that that's the right thing to teach modern kids. He said it is an unambivalent appreciation, warts and all, is what we want to do. Anyway, on all this, on the warning about how we teach in the schools and at home, I just think he was ahead of his time. Finally, he spoke of the shining city on a hill, that phrase he always used. He said it was John Winthrop's phrase, and it captured the America John Winthrop of the Mayflower imagined. Now, that old Mayflower man also came to America on a leaky little boat. He was also lucky to be alive. Reagan then spoke of what he saw when he used that phrase. In his mind, the city on a hill was a tall, proud city built on rocks stronger than oceans, wind-swept, God-blessed, and teeming with people of all kinds living in harmony and peace. A city with free ports that hummed with commerce and creativity. And if there had to be city walls, the walls had doors. And the doors would open to anyone with the will and the heart to get here. He said the city on a hill stands pretty well tonight, more prosperous, more secure, happier than it had been 8 years before. He said her glow has... We're having a see me moment. He said her glow has held steady no matter what storm, and she's still a beacon, still a magnet for all who must have freedom, for all the pilgrims from all the lost places who are hurtling through the darkness toward home. So, I just liked remembering that today. It has been on my mind. I see some familiar faces here today, and I think, wasn't it good to know him? To know a great man who was also a good man, and to remember how much he loved America. Let's bring that forward, shall we? Thank you. It's an honor today to honor my old friend.
Wow. That's Peggy Noonan. Wow. Please rise for the laying of the wreath and honors to President Reagan.
Honor guard! Attention! Attention to order!
The President of the United States has directed that a presidential wreath be laid at the resting place of all former presidents on the anniversary of their birth. Brigadier General Jason Woodworth is designated to place a wreath at the tomb of the 40th President of the United States, Ronald Wilson Reagan, on 6 February 2022 in honor of the 111th anniversary of his birth and in tribute to his distinguished service to a grateful nation. Please remain standing for the retiring of the colors and the conclusion of the ceremony with Anchors Aweigh and the Marine Hymn. This concludes the ceremony. Thank you all so much for coming. If you'd like, there's birthday cake which will be served right in there. Enjoy yourselves.